Hey, this is Carlo of 4GQ TV here, and I have Paul, my co-host, with us. But I have a very special guest, and we're very excited to talk to you. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and who you are?
Yeah, hi, my name is Ryan Matthew Cohn. I'm sort of known as an obsessive collector, and the type of things that I specialize in are rare and unusual artifacts. So that could be, something like this. This is an animatronic prop from the movie Rose Red, which was a Stephen King movie. I think it's just become on Netflix recently. But I'm also the co-author of The Witch's Door, which is my new book, Oddities and Tales from the Esoteric to the Extreme, calling from Connecticut. And I live in a house filled with artifacts. I think we have something like 5,000 or 6,000 things in this home. Probably more, actually. I never actually counted.
Wow. So I have to ask you this question.
Hmm.
I'm very interested to know is you handle all these unique artifacts that most people probably wouldn't want to touch or be scared to go near. Do you have anything that people have legends or myths behind that say, "Oh, this is cursed," or this has like something attached to it or anything like that?
Sure. It's almost always a doll. I don't know why that is. I think because dolls, obviously, they typically look humanistic. And something like a ventriloquist doll, for instance, is not only humanistic, but it appears to be talking on its own. So they've had this stigma attached to them where, having a ventriloquist doll or a doll that looks humanistic in nature is automatically haunted. And that's just not really the case. I think that typically when someone sees a creepy artifact or, something that has maybe like a dark subject matter to it, they automatically assume that it's haunted. And that just doesn't happen, but it does happen on occasion, and it has happened to me just a couple times in my years of collecting.
I was just going to say, you can thank Rod Serling for the fear of ventriloquist.
Oh yeah, for sure. He lived in the town of Westport, Connecticut, where I am.
Oh, wow.
So he's someone that's mentioned quite frequently. They always call me like the second coming of Rod Serling. I just need to host a new Twilight Zone, I think.
Well, that's not a bad thing to be compared to. Not a bad thing at all.
Huge fan.
Can you tell us a little bit about your experience with like a haunted object that you've had? And then once you had a haunted object, how did you separate yourself from like the entity or the haunted?
Sure. So to bring it back to dolls, the only time that I had a really like severe haunting or a curse or just some kind of like activity that was outside of like my normal life, something that seemed dark, was these two ventriloquist dolls. And the long story short is I had purchased 12 of them and I sold 10, kept the two, and they lived here for about a year without any major issues other than the fact that they would keep like moving around the room. That's not to say I saw them walking or anything, but I would put them on a chair and then like a couple times it would be on the floor, or they would be at this side of the room, or they would be at like the foot of the stairs. And I just assumed that someone was messing with me. I thought maybe like Regina was like, moving my dolls around to just like trick me. And she swore up and down she did not touch them. She did not move them. And then on occasion, she would hear footsteps right above our living room. And the dolls were housed on the second floor, right above in our library. And I didn't ever hear this, but she said a few times she would hear like little footsteps. And we have 3 dogs, and she would always do like a dog check, make sure that they were here in the room. Sure enough, the dogs were right there. And she just was like, all right, well, maybe it's the old house that we live in. Our house is from 1876. And, it makes a lot of weird noises, especially in the winter time. There's clanking and clacking. And, the house always seems like it's alive. But it's quite a difference between heating and like these little dolls walking around upstairs. So when we told that story, we decided to shoot them for the book. And that's when all hell broke loose in this house. The pipes basically broke. They started leaking water on my rare book collection. The heating broke over at my tenant's place because we have a cottage on the property. Our cars essentially exploded, even though they're both brand new. It was all this really, really, all these unfortunate events happening consecutively, right into the point where we just had to get rid of the dolls. And people really liked hearing these horrible stories from us. It wasn't worth it. It was that bad that I ended up giving them away to a colleague of mine who's, sort of a pseudo professional in the paranormal world. And as soon as I got them out of my possession, hate to use that word, everything kind of went back to normal. Like all the negativity had faded, but then she started getting a lot of bad luck. However, she's become quite well known now for those dolls. So they became famous, but I think at somewhat of a cost.
Have you ever gone into a place when you're looking for items and you're just like, no, I'm not going to take this because the energy feels off on this?
Sure. That's actually happened numerous times where something that maybe I thought would be cool to like resell, if it's really creepy, I just won't take it at all. I won't bring it into my home. And especially now having experienced the energy with the dolls, I'm very careful about what I bring in here. Though I say that, and a friend of mine gave me this big ventriloquist doll that's like this tall. And he was like, oh, it's been sitting on my property for 12 years. You can just take it. And of course I took it, and it's down in my studio right now. It's not done anything weird, and I actually brought it to an event over the weekend, and there was no no possessions. It wasn't moving on its own or anything, but it's very creepy looking.
Besides that experience with the dolls that you've had in your possession, what would you say was the most awkward, uncomfortable experience that you had around maybe another object, like it's somebody else's? Could be museum, collection, house. Have you had any instances where you just felt like something was there to antagonize you?
Antagonize me, no. But I have been offered on numerous occasions things that just seemed uncouth. Things that, on paper or photograph, it looked really cool, and it's something that maybe I could have like resold or even, housed in our collection, but it ended up being too weird, or just unsavory, if that makes any sense. Sometimes an object is just too bizarre, and it doesn't really fit into what we do. Like serial killer art, people offer me John Wayne Gacy paintings all the time, and it's not something I would ever buy because I just don't like the darkness that's attached to an object like that. That has like this inherent negativity to it because of who painted it. Whereas, like this object or, like a skull or something else, it's just aesthetically sort of weird or considered weird, but doesn't really have any energy that I've found to be attached to it. So it seems to fit into our collection, doesn't give us any problems.
The Witch's Door, the book that's next to you, I assume that's the one that you wrote?
Correct. I co-wrote it with my wife, Regina.
Okay. Can you tell us a little bit about the book and what's in there, what people can expect?
Yeah, sure. So, everybody wanted us to have a coffee table book as our first book, and we've been featured in a bunch of other books over the years, and it would showcase, our house at that time. And one of my fears about just putting out a coffee table book was that this collection changes every few months. I could get an email in the morning that could change the whole trajectory of my life. And that could mean like maybe I'm adding a few pieces to an entire museum's worth of collection. And that happens more frequently than not. And that's one of the things that I've become known for, is that if there's a museum collection, or say someone passes away and they have, like 3,000 objects, I'll try to get the whole entire collection one way or another, either by buying it. Sometimes people donate collections to me. But it was just, these are like one of the stories in the book. And we thought it might be actually more interesting to start telling our tales and, introduce who we are and what we do and some of our favorite stories from being on the road. And that's really what the Witch's Door is. People would ask us, hey, what do you do for a living? And we never really knew how to explain it. Like we wear a lot of different hats in this field. Collecting is obviously one of them. I co-curate the Oddities flea market, which is a traveling oddities event where people sell their wares, art, antiques, and other such things. And there were just too many things to describe. So we're like, oh, well, writing a book might be a good way to explain exactly what we do and entertain people with some of our weird tales and, some of the strange people that we meet along the way.
Paul, did you have any questions?
No, I'm just enthralled. I think it sounds amazing. I will say, you just said you get entire. So do you have, like, aside from your house, do you have like storage containers full of stuff? Because it sounds like you would get a lot of stuff in, and there's only so much room. I mean, I gotta assume. Yeah.
So I lived in Brooklyn for 23 years, and when I lived in Brooklyn, it was really hard. I had a big studio, and that was supposed to be a work studio, but it ended up becoming, basically a storage unit. And it was a pretty large storage unit. But I had to do a lot of my work in there. So then I ended up having, I think when I left Brooklyn, I had 6 storage units. And I kept upgrading to bigger apartments, but it never was enough space until I moved to Connecticut. And we definitely have a lot more space here. I have like an outbuilding where I store a lot of the things that I'm either working on or trying to figure out what to do with. But I'll always find a way. And I think big collectors or obsessive collectors will always figure out how you can house something, because in my mind, if you don't pounce on something that's rare, someone else is going to. Someone else is waiting for you to not take something so that they can take it. So I've always figured it out. I think I'll probably reach a point where I can't fit anything. But I do sell a lot as well. So I'm not only a collector, but I guess that's what separates me from being obsessive compulsive or a hoarder.
Now, with your collection that you have, I imagine you get a lot of interest from a lot of people to come out and check it out.
Sure.
Has your stuff ever been featured in different Hollywood movies? Like, has any producers come to you, or the set designers come to you and say, "Hey, we would like to use your piece in this film, this TV show"?
Sure. Yeah. I helped curate a couple sets for some major movies. I did The Greatest Showman, which was the movie about P.T. Barnum. And I also worked on a movie called Wonderstruck, where I basically helped create this big museum cabinet of curiosities. And I was able to take, some of the pieces in this collection and apply them there. But then I've done, numerous shoots for, different fashion companies. And I actually used to design for Ralph Lauren. So while I was also doing, the antique stuff, I was also doing a lot of like jewelry for I did Gossip Girl. I used to lend them a lot of stuff, believe it or not. And, I think in the future, maybe we would even rent out our house, because our house really is set up very much like a museum. But I enjoy curating sets, and I've done a couple museums as well.
Do you have a favorite piece or a favorite era that pieces were made in?
Not really. I like to think about this collection as one big piece in a way. All these different components create somewhat of in my mind, it's not a masterpiece per se, because I guess I'm not going to boast about the collection like that, but it is, all these little moving parts create this one big experience. So it's hard to pick one specific favorite item. I think there's pieces that I'll tend to if someone's coming over and taking a little tour of the house, I'll say, I want to show you this piece. It's one of my favorites, but one of my favorites could be, 30 pieces on the first floor, because there's just so many things here. And if it stayed in my home, that means that it's important enough that it at least has a provenance, a good history, and a good story. And that's really one of the reasons why I got into this to begin with, was that I really like telling stories, and I really am fascinated with where something came from, why, what time period, and what the story is, because oftentimes the story can be more interesting than the actual object.
Now, you brought up so you mentioned why you kind of got into it, but when did you start actually collecting, or what triggered that one? Hey, this is cool. Did you?
Yeah, so I could tell early on from my first memories that I was different than other people. Other kids were collecting, toys and such, and they would have a few things. I always wanted a bunch of things. I don't know why it was. I like to pick through and be all right, I like these. These ones are sort of unimportant, but they're important to me because those are almost like bargaining chips. So I think the first time where I realized that this could be turned into a business of sorts must have been around 10 years old. I started collecting obsessively baseball cards. And it was funny. And my parents were really surprised, because I hated sports. I never wanted to do anything but collect things. And I got fascinated with sports cards. It wasn't just baseball. It was any sports card that was worth something. And I learned early on that if you bought a large collection, you could keep the really good stuff to start building a cohesive, good collection. And then you could sell the other stuff, and it would help keep you going. Sell this stuff, get money. Right. But then you're still left with this great collection. And then you could build the great collection into the greatest collection, until the point where maybe you move on to something else, and then you can sell that collection and then move on to a different habit. And so I still kind of use that same mentality today. I'll buy many things, keep these things, sell the rest, and it helps like fund what it is that I do.
Right. I kind of did the same thing with comic books, where you buy a lot and then you sort out what's good and you get rid of the stuff. Yeah, and it's
exactly.
It's same with buying a storage locker. You might find one good thing in that storage locker and the rest of it's crap.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to have the ability to do that. I know a lot of people that don't know how to get rid of anything, and I've come across a lot of hoarder collectors that they have great stuff, but they can't display it. You can't see anything that's going on in their homes because there's just so much in there. Right. And it's good stuff mixed with mediocre stuff. And, I think that is one of the ways that you build a collection. But I think there's a huge distinction between a hoarder and maybe even an obsessive collector.
And I think with the room I see behind you, which is at least your stuff is on display, you can go in there and you can enjoy it. It's not stacked up in boxes going, over there's this thing that's really cool. You can't see it right now, but it's,
You haven't been in the basement. Well, it's funny too, because we have another property on my property, which is a 19th century chapel that was moved here in the 1950s. And it was part of a different estate. And it was moved here because the deacon of one of the local churches ended up using it as a little congregation. And so when we purchased this property, we put a steeple on top of it, a spire rather. And I had all these intentions of turning it into another living space. And of course, now it's just like stacked to the ceiling with boxes. And so it happens, like I said earlier, you might procure a collection of a few hundred pieces and they have to go somewhere until you figure out what the next step is.
Yeah, because you have to have time to go through all those boxes and go, okay, keep it, toss it, keep it, well, maybe not toss, but, pass along. Yeah.
So I have a question, and this has been in my mind for a little bit now. Do you have any pieces from, let's say, the Roman Empire that you just really love?
Roman Empire? I don't think so. Maybe. we have a lot of ancient artifacts in this collection. But then, recently I've started to even collect contemporary art. And it's something that I never really had a huge connection with it outside of the fact that I'm a contemporary artist. And I make my own pieces, but it's something that I never collected until, in the book, we tell a story about Richard Harris, not the actor, but a collector outside of Chicago. He was this older gentleman who was very wealthy, and he collected and put together probably the biggest collection of memento mori related art. And I procured, I'd say, a good 75% of the collection after he passed away. The rest went to Bonhams and Sotheby's. And in that collection was not only old master paintings and old master sculptures, but a lot of contemporary pieces. So it wasn't until I got that collection that I was like, oh, wait a minute, I think that there's a place for all this stuff as long as it has the right subject matter. And it really kind of changed the way that I view art and collecting in general.
I was just going to ask if there's any, is there any, in the way you're set up in the stuff you can see in your house, is there any thematic themes to each room, or is it just kind of what looks good where?
No, I always thought it would be cool to have themed rooms, but I think I'll wait until we have an English villa to do that, because while I have a lot of space in this house, I'm still limited in space.
Right.
I remember when we first found this place, I was like, oh my God, this place is so big. I'm never going to be able to outfit it. And then I'd say a good 6 months later, it was like, oh shit, I'm out of space. So, it's not necessarily themed. I try to make it livable though. I don't really want to live in a museum. Right. I do. I don't think Regina does. But that's the difference between having more space here in Connecticut than in Brooklyn. We had stuff that went floor to ceiling, and it was very nicely curated, but you could barely move through the place because we lived in 1,200 square feet versus I think we're in 5,000 square feet now or something.
Do you have any upcoming projects that you want to tell our audience about?
So we're taking the book sort of on a tour, which we've been doing for the past month. So we have some upcoming events in Connecticut, as well as we're going to Paris in January. So that should be really cool. But we have an Oddities flea market in New York City on December 7th. And that's a really fun one. It's a Saturday only, and we have about 75 vendors. So it's a really fun event, and it's right before the holidays. You can get your witch's door signed, and it's a great time. There's a really interesting group of people that come to the New York City show. It's a cross between, you know, like your typical goth people, mixed with like people that are in like the medical profession, which have, you know, really become big fans of the event. But then there tends to be like a lot of celebrities.
I can certainly imagine, because they would love to have, you know, this rare, unique piece somewhere in their home. I mean, it makes it interesting, a talk piece.
Yeah, and it's cool. We have, you know, seasoned collectors that are part of our community, to people that are like just getting into it, or someone that just wants maybe even like a piece of jewelry that has a skull on it. So it's a really broad spectrum. So that's going to be really fun. I don't know. I hope we get a second book, because I think the second book would be more of a pictorial, whereas this is more stories. And there's a lot of beautiful pictures in the book as well. But I think the next one could be, you know, more photographic, and people really want to see details of what's in here.
Right now, where can people purchase your book?
You can get it on Amazon. You can get it at Barnes & Noble. And pretty much most retailers carry The Witch's Door now. And we also have an audio version of the book if you want to hear Regina and myself read the book. That's through Audible.
Be interesting, yeah.
I would, yeah. I don't know if I want to hear myself talk, but you know, that was also an interesting thing to do. If you've never written a book, if like that part you thought was hard, reading a book and not messing up a word is very difficult to do.
And I'm like you, I hate hearing my own voice. I do this a lot, but I hate going back and listening. I go, nope, can't do it. Sorry.
You have a great voice.
Thank you.
You know, before we get out of here, I do have 2 questions. Paul will ask the last one, but is that an alligator statue?
Yes, actually, this is a funny piece. And these were actually pretty common at the turn of the century until like the 1920s and 30s, but it was called an alligator butler. And you would put it, you know, basically when you first walked into your house, and it would have a little tray that went here, and you put your keys on there, or like your change, and it would just be sitting. Also, people would use it if they were having a dinner party. It would have people's names on the little tray. So at some point, I need to find a little tray that fits into his hands, and that's what it would be used for.
Wow, that is awesome. I love alligators, and that's why I moved to Florida. It's one of the reasons.
Yeah.
So that's just a cool piece. That is, I love it.
Yeah, and this is a really nice old one, which is the only type of taxidermy that I really collect, is old taxidermy, Victorian taxidermy up until like the 1920s or so.
Yeah, because you moved your camera, they can't really see it anymore, but you have this beautiful hyena over on the other side of you.
Oh yeah, there's a taxidermy hyena that was actually part of a museum, and I procured that from a fellow collector, and he just lives here now.
All right, this is the last question. This question we ask everybody we interview, and this is the most important answer you can give. It'll make or break this interview. Pineapple on pizza, yes or no?
Nope.
Good call.
Yes. Yes.
I think the reasoning, I like to mix sweet and savory. In fact, I went to a crepe place yesterday, and we got a savory crepe, and we also got a sweet crepe. And that was a situation where I actually kind of liked mixing. Like, there was cheese on the sweet crepe, and it worked, but I've had pineapple on pizza, and I can't deal with it. However, let me ask you guys this. Honey on pizza.
I've heard of it. I've heard it's good. I have not tried it yet.
It's a thing in Connecticut, hot honey. And there's a lot of different places that almost like specialize in this hot honey. I thought I was going to hate it, and it's absolutely incredible.
That's the second time in like 6 months that I've heard somebody mention that. So I may have to try it. And I'm actually doing a fundraiser next weekend. And one of the things, if I hit one of my goals, I'm going to eat pineapple on pizza on my stream. And everybody knows that I hate it. So
yeah, you know what? I think it's the texture of the pineapple.
Yeah.
Is a little strange with the texture of like your typical pizza.
Yep.
And I think that's what I don't like. It's like eating a sweet eyeball or something. I don't know. I like pineapple on its own. Mixed with pizza,
Correct call. Well, thank you for joining us today. That's been an incredible talk. I'm disabled, so and I bet you your house is an ADA, but man, I'd love to look around your house.
I'll get a lift for you by the time you get here.
There you go.
Yeah, we have 3 floors.
Because some of that stuff, I mean, just what I can see on camera just looks incredible.
Yeah, and this is just the entry room that I'm sitting in right now.
So you got the alligator butler. I'm curious if you've ever had one of those, because I know for a long time they used to use like the elephant feet for umbrella stands by the door too. Yeah.
Yeah, those were really popular. Once again, at like the turn of the century.
Right.
I'm not entirely sure why elephant products became so popular. I think it's because people were going on a lot of like African hunting expeditions,
Safaris, yeah.
Which I don't necessarily agree with. But they became like a very popular accessory in people's houses, and very much in England, actually, in like aristocratic estates, you would see, the elephant foot table or what have you.
It's going to be interesting, in 100 years or so, what people look at what we have in our houses and go, why?
Maybe it'll all be computerized at that point. You have computerized pictures of things as opposed to actual objects.
Well, man, thank you so much for your time today and telling us about your collection and your interest in haunted stories. It blew my mind, some of the stuff that you have, and I could stare at your background all day long. It's just so cool. Like, you just have so many cool pieces. I can't wait to check out the book, and any virtual tours of your house would be amazing. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, fellas. Have a good rest of your day.
You too.